Yonda pravishya mimam prasuptam sanjeevayadi akila shakti dharasudhamna anyamscha hastacharana sravanatvagadin prananamo bhagavate purushaya tubhyam. So today we are beginning our discussion on Buddhism, different schools of Buddhist philosophy, both the Mahayana and Hinayana systems. The Mahayana systems belonging to the two schools of realism and the two schools of idealism, Sautrandika and Vaibhashika, Vijnanavada and Shunyavada. Most of their foundational texts are in Sanskrit language, and the foundational text of the Hinayana system, what we call Theravada, most of its foundational texts are in Pali script or Pali or Prakrit. So I think after Advaita Vedanta, this is perhaps the most elaborate discussion of any system of Indian philosophy, because the vastness of the scope and the extensiveness of its reach and its relevance in our own times. So just to draw your attention to an important aspect of India's philosophical evolution. Now, if you look at the history of India's philosophical evolution, you find from Buddha's time, that is from 6th century BC up to the 19th century, almost 2,400 years, 24 centuries, is a very crucial period. At one end, 6th century BC, stands Buddha, and in 19th century you can see Sri Ramakrishna Vivekananda, who made significant contributions to India's philosophical tradition. In between, as a very, very important, crucial junction of India's evolution of philosophical thoughts, stands Shankaracharya, 8th century. So, total 2,400 years of philosophical, in a way also spiritual evolution, on the one hand. And then you also should keep in mind that Buddha, who lived in the 6th century, 6th and 5th century, let's say BC, of course, before Christ. According to many conservative estimates, he was born approximately 560 or 563 BC and passed away in 480 BC or 483. 80 years, he lived for 80 years. So Buddha appears in an age which is called actual age. It's a very interesting term. A new contribution by a German Swiss philosopher and psychiatrist, his name is Karl Jaspers. He articulates this concept in his Origin and Goal of History, well-known book, The Origin and Goal of History. And he says, almost, let's say, around 300, 400 years from 6th or 7th century BC up to 3rd century BC. Almost 400 years, or 350 years to be more specific. It's together called actual age, which continues to influence the philosophers of our own times, even those who refuse to be influenced by the great thinkers who belong to the actual age called. It includes many great Greek thinkers like Socrates, Pythagoras, Epicurus, Heraclitus, Pyrrho. Incidentally, he was the one who accompanied Alexander the Great in his campaigns through Persia and other places right up to India's northwestern border. Democritus, Anaxagoras, Parmenides, Plato, Socrates, all of them belong to this age called actual age. And also it included men like Buddha, the great philosophers of Upanishadic age, and also Confucius, Lao Tse, China's Zoroaster in Persia, now called Iran, unfortunately. That great tradition of Zoroaster has almost vanished is one of the darkest and unpleasant accidents in the history of human evolution, the evolution of human civilization. Zoroastrian civilization has practically vanished, except it survives in some parts of India and in some other parts where those who followed his tradition fled from Iran when it was overrun by the Arabs, the Muslim invaders. So, Buddha's contemporaries were Socrates, Epicurus and Pyrrho. And if you look upon Buddha as a representative figure along with the Upanishadic philosophers, if you the what you call the Vedic lexicographers like Nirukta, the author of Nirukta. So then you find Buddha belongs to that specific age which had a transformative effect on the evolution of human civilization. The idea of transcendental thinking, contemplation, reflecting on the meaning and existence of human life and a transcendental perspective with regard to the ends and means of human existence. All this happened during the time which we now call the axial age. It's a term coined by Karl Jaspers. Of course, this is not very well accepted by many thinkers, but it's a very important concept in understanding Buddha's place in the evolution of human thoughts. Now, when you talk about Buddhism, there are a few things to be understood. Buddhism as it evolved in India and Buddhism as it evolved outside India's geographical borders. From 3rd century BC onwards, maybe a little later, maybe 2nd century BC onwards, Buddhism began to spread in many countries, many nations outside Indian subcontinent, like what is now called Sri Lanka or Ceylon, and then went to Tibet, China, and then later on to Japan and other Far Eastern countries. And one of the great emperors of India, the Magadha Emperor called the great Ashoka, the Ashoka Chakra, the wheel of Dharma Chakra, dharmic wheel of Ashoka, is an important symbol of the national ideal of Hinduism and India, of course. Because remember, when you talk about Buddhism and Hinduism, you have to remember, in Indian context, Buddha was not a non-Hindu. Buddhism became a separate denomination, as a separate religion, only after the first Buddhist council that took place a few decades later after his passing away, Buddha. It happened in Rajagriha, the first Buddhist council. There are different accounts about this. So, Buddhism, according to many modern Hindu reformers like Vivekananda, is a humanized, a pragmatic interpretation of the Upanishadic philosophy. Now, this may not be acceptable to many modern thinkers who want to treat Buddhism as something essentially non-Indian. Historically, that is totally inaccurate and is often looked upon as a kind of appropriation of the Oriental wisdom by many overzealous Western thinkers and intellectuals. So that's a different subject. We will deal with that when we talk about Nagarjuna, Vasubandhu, Chandrakirti, and the commentators of these well-known books of Mahayana text and Hinayana text. We will discuss later. So, in a way, if you can give a humanistic interpretation of Advaita Vedanta, a practical interpretation of Advaita Vedanta, taking away the monotheistic ideal which is not central to Advaita Vedanta but is included in Advaita, then you get Buddhism. So, in Hindu tradition, Hindu philosophical tradition, Vedantic tradition, there are three important canonical traditions. One is the tradition of the Srutis or Vedas, the tradition of Smrtis and the tradition of Puranas, mythological books. In the pristine Buddhist tradition, which is closer to Buddha's original teachings, called Hinayana Theravada Buddhism, mostly prevalent in Sri Lanka, Burma and other countries. The orthodox system is called. For them, the important texts are Sutta Pitaka, Vinaya Pitaka and Abhidhamma Pitaka. It's called baskets, 3 canons, Sutta, Vinaya and Abhidhamma Pitaka. We will discuss this in course of time, one after another. Now, a few things about the life of Buddha, or what you call the chronology of Buddha's life. Because in a way, Buddhism is intrinsically and very closely, intimately linked to Buddha's own life cycle. It's very important. For example, Buddha's own realization of the reality of dukkha, and again his search for nirvana. These 2 important events are to be kept in mind in getting a perfect understanding of the central teachings of Buddhism, that is, the 4 noble truths. So, without understanding Buddha's life, you won't be able to clearly understand the essence of the concept of dukkha and also the concept of nirvana. So, Buddha was born, in what is now Nepal, was a prince in a Hindu dynasty. And when he was born, there was a prophecy that Buddha will end up becoming a great emperor or a great mendicant. And his father wanted to make sure that he will become a great emperor who would continue the Buddhist lineage. I mean, not Buddhist lineage, rather the lineage of the country, the kingdom, the king. So his original name was Siddhartha Gautama. And the king, of course, is Suddhodana. So, and mother's name was Maya, the queen. So they wanted to make sure that he was well educated in the subjects of the 4 Vedas, Rigveda, Yajurveda, Samaveda and the Atharvaveda, and also the Vedanga, Siksha, Vyakarana, Kalpa, Nirukta, Chandasa, Jyotish, all these Vedangas, the auxiliary studies. It's part of Vedic studies. And then he was also well trained as a great king, as a warrior. And if you read Buddha's original life by the Buddha Vijaya and other well-known Leda Vistara, there are quite a few books in traditional Sanskrit. Buddha is extolled as a great man in all respects, as a king, as a ruler, and also a wise man, but also a great defender of dharma, faith. Even before he became Buddha, he was a great soldier. He was also a great wise man. Now, one day, it is said that Buddha Gautama, means Siddhartha Gautama, when he was about, there are different accounts, 20 years, 28 years, etc. He went out, according to some sources, between age 19 and 24. He ventured outside the palace walls and he encountered 4 sights, 4 visions, that is, old age, sickness, death. And also it is said that he saw the face of a man who was serene, who was a monk, who was a spiritual person. So on the one hand, the problems of empirical life in this world, sufferings of different forms, old age, sickness and death. He was totally unaware of this darker side of human existence before he actually saw in the streets an old man, a sick man, and also a procession. Somebody was taking a dead body to the cremation ground. So it is said, and he started thinking, and he wanted to renounce his world. Finally, he left the place, and then he came to Bodh Gaya. He sat under the tree. There is a well-known verse Pismentilada Vistara, Ihasane Shushadu Me Sharidam, Tugasti Mamsam Chivrayam Chiyatu, Aprapisiddhim Behujanma Durlabam Naivasanat Kayam Adas Chalishyati. Buddha took a resolve, a decision to sit under the tree in meditation with a strong resolve. I'm going to sit here and I won't get up from this seat before and without realizing the supreme truth. Let my body perish, let it be reduced to bones and ashes. Tugasti mamsam cha vilayam cha yatuhu. Let my body be reduced to bones, to marrow. Let it perish before getting the spiritual liberation, nirvana. I won't get up from the seat. This is the essence of Buddha's life. Now, there are many important aspects about this. To understand the significance of Buddha's life and his connection with what he taught, what he gave to the world, we have to understand. Buddha, in spite of being born as a prince in a luxurious palace, felt that there was a problem with all these. One may live in a very luxurious surroundings, live as a prince or a king, still one cannot escape the unavoidable destiny of getting old, and body may become sick, and this body may perish, death. So then what's the meaning of this life? Is death the end of human existence? Is there something beyond that? This inquiry took Buddha to where he eventually reached, the great world teacher. Now, as I mentioned, I was talking about the axial age. So, in this axial age, which includes so many great thinkers who thought of the meaning beyond this empirical world, between Confucius, Lao Tse, Zoroaster, and also some of the Jewish prophets who are included in the list of the great men who lived in axial age by Karl Jaspers. Also the great Upanishad philosophers and thinkers. So one important contribution of this age, what we call axial age, was you think beyond the meaning of life in this world. Something transcendental, something contemplative, something reflective of the ultimate meaning of human existence. This is a distinct contribution of this particular age. And Buddha is an archetypal representative of this age. In Hinduism, if you look at the great Upanishads, you find these ideas developed almost 4,000 years before axial age. But according to historical criteria, which is in a way subject to changes because new and new discoveries are being made from time to time, which push the history more and more backward. So if you can think of this, you find many of these ideas were articulated during what we now call axial age. So in that respect, this is true that the great Upanishad thinkers who developed some of the distinct philosophical ideas based on the ancient Upanishads, which are much more ancient, and also Buddha represented the archetypal representatives of Vedanta in a way. Remember, Vedanta, as I mentioned, in its more humanistic interpretation, in its most pragmatic interpretation, is Buddhism. And in its more empirical interpretation, you may call it the Confucian ethics, the ethical philosophical ideas that developed in China, and some of the theological ideas which came from the Jewish prophets of the same age, or the great teaching that came from great men like Socrates and others in Greece. They all belong to this axial age. Now I'm coming back to Buddha. If you've got any doubt to ask, we can discuss this later. There's scope for that. So what Buddha taught the world was simply this. There's a problem in this empirical existence. You can be very healthy, you can be very rich, you can be very famous. Still, one day you get old, you get sick, and you die. So then what's the meaning of human existence? So he said, in essence he said, there are four noble truths. These four noble truths called Chatvari Arya Satyani. Four noble truths. The first noble truth is that there is such a thing as called suffering, dukkha. Now, one may imagine that Buddha was a great philosopher, the way you look upon Confucius, Socrates, or Shankaracharya. In a way, Buddha's attitude was somewhat anti-speculative. So it may be true that Buddhism later developed many profound philosophical systems, Shunyavada of Nagarjuna, Vijnanavada of different denominations, the Alaya Vijnanavada, the earlier form manifestation, Pravritti Vijnanavada, which later manifestation, so Vasubandhu, Chandrakirti, Nignaga and others. And again, the great thinkers belonging to Hinayana system, whom primarily depend upon the Pali canon. So many of these thinkers later developed many profound philosophical ideas. The fact is that historically Buddha was not a very speculative person. I mean, his method was anti-speculative, not going too much into philosophy, but rather he taught the world to live a good life, dharmic life in this world, and take care of your life in this world. This is Buddhism in symbol. Now, after his teachings became popular, after the Buddhist denomination developed into a separate religion, then a large number of philosophers and philosophical systems did emerge in Buddhism. So today you find there are many books belonging to the Sautrantika and Vaibhashika, Vijnanavada and Shunyavada, and also the earlier Pali canonical tradition belonging to the Hinayana system or Theravada system. But Buddha himself mostly focused on life in this world. And he said, first of all, you should understand that there is a problem in living in this world, thinking that you can live happily, you can have all the things if you want, if you make enough money, if you are healthy, if you are strong, if you are popular, everything is wonderful. Buddha said, no, there is a kind of inherent incompleteness in what we normally call success in the worldly sense. An inherent, inescapable incompleteness. And that incompleteness is called dukkha, suffering or sorrow. So frequently, when you translate dukkha into sorrow, one may think Buddhism is a very cynical religion. No. What Buddha reminds us is this. This life, which includes our birth, we may live for 100 years, and we die, and in the process, in this life, we may acquire all that we want, all the money we want, all the health and success, everything. Still, one day, they will disappear. So, there is a kind of inherent incompleteness. And that incompleteness was what actually bothered Buddha when, as a young man, he left his palace. There are different versions according to historians. According to some people, Buddha left his palace when he was 24 years old. According to some other sources, he left his palace when 28 years old. That's more immaterial. But the point is, Buddha physically encountered this problem of the fundamental incompleteness of life in this empirical world. So he said, there is suffering, which means there is an incompleteness. There is something still wanting in this so-called happy life. This is the first noble truth. You know why it is called noble? One may understand. It is noble because realization of this truth can eventually lead you into understanding the cause of this relief, the cause of this sorrow, this dukkha, this incompleteness, and eventually you may find a way out, and that may lead you, that search for a way out can lead you into nirvana, enlightenment. One thing. Second reason why this is called noble truth, Chattvari Arya Satyani. So Arya is a very important word in Indian philosophical tradition. Please remember, this has nothing at all to do with the word Aryan as used in what we call in Germany in 1930s. Because the word Arya in Sanskrit means noble, broad-minded, belonging to a cultured, civilized lineage. That says, Mahakula Kulinarya Sarvya Sajjana Sathavaha Aryaha. This is the meaning of Arya, according to the traditional dictionary, the verse that is in Sanskrit dictionary, it's called. Mahakula Kulinarya. Amarakosha, Amarasimha was a great historian of language, great lexicographer, a great linguist. She wrote this kosha, dictionary. It's more like thesaurus. In the 2nd century AD, it is called Amarakosha. Kosha roughly means dictionary. In that he says, Arya is a person who is born in a very civilized, compassionate, refined home, tradition, lineage, who is of a compassionate, sattvic temperament, and who is basically a good person, Mahakula Kulina Arya, Sabhyaha, Sajjanaha, Sathavaha, Aryaha. Aryas are those who are cultured, refined, compassionate, very humane. So if you can think of all human qualities or humanistic qualities, a person who is a repository of all these humanistic qualities is called Arya, noble. So these 4 noble truths are called for Arya Satyani, Chattvari, 4 Arya Satyani, noble truths. The first noble truth is that life is full of suffering. Means there is a problem, something wanting, something incomplete, something impermanent, something still unpleasant, an unhappy reality about this called worldly life. And the second noble truth is the truth about the cause of suffering. There is a cause, there is a reason why this suffering is there. So this suffering has some causes. And when Buddha explained the cause of the suffering, he says, for example, he talks about praditya samutpada, dependent origination, which are interlinked, interconnected. That is, suffering in life is due to birth, the will to be born, the mental clinging. So, first of all, we want to be born, and then we want to enjoy sensory objects, and then we have this desire. So, we have this sense-object contact, sense experience, then the 6 organs, the 5 senses of perception, 5 senses of cognition and mind, and again this embryonic organism. There's a link which in a way we can put it in simple language. You can say ignorance, impressions, then vijnana, the initial consciousness, mind, body, and then 6 organs of perception, sense contact, sense experience, trishna, clinging to life, we call upadana, and then tendency to be born and rebirth, and then this continuous link, which essentially what it means is the fundamental cause of our suffering is because we want to be happy, to put in simple language. And we want to be always happy. The desire to be happy all the time is the actual cause of unhappiness. So, this is an important point. And this desire to be happy causes to be born again and again. When we die with some desire, that desire we carry on to the next life. So, whatever sense impressions, samskaras, vasanas we have accumulated in one life, and all the desires which may not be fully fulfilled in one life, when we are born again with this desire, which become part of the baggage with which we are born, all the samskaras, impressions, tendencies, they come along with our new life. And then this continues. So when we have desire, we will be forced to take another birth, because we will be continuing our search for fulfilling those desires. So even the least bit of desire will create a condition for being born again. One may ask this question, is this birth such a problem? So that is an important problem. In fact, that is where the historical relevance of the axial age comes into prominence. Now, according to this great historian, the great philosopher, psychiatrist also, Karl Jaspers, a German, Swiss. Now, what he says, according to him, this particular age created a new paradigm in human civilization, looking for something transcendental, something that is not empirical, something which is otherworldly, search for some higher, ultimate, transcendental meaning for human life. So, Buddha also belongs to that age. You find it in the Upanishads also. Of course, in some traditions, this search for a transcendental meaning took great thinkers into the idea of a great, powerful, monotheistic God who will listen to all your prayers and fulfill all your desires, who will give you freedom from this transmigratory cycle. It is not called transmigratory cycle in non-Buddhist, non-Hindu traditions, non-Indian traditions, because there, instead of liberation from samsara, from this life, death, rebirth cycle, this liberation is given in the form of a special place where you go and live happily, called Sorga, heaven, some higher place, where we will have none of these problems that we normally confront in this material world. So in Buddhism and Hinduism, this search for this transcendental meaning led to a concept that answered the inquiry, that answered the questions with regard to putting an end to this wheel of samsara, the wheel of birth, life, death and rebirth, and then continuation of this wheel. So Buddha said that if you want to get out of this, you have to first of all renounce desire. Once you renounce desire, then you have no more rebirth. But to understand true meaning and to be free from desire, you have to get a clear idea of how to get out of it. And for that, the third noble truth is suffering will cease only if the cause of suffering is stopped. So, cessation of sufferings, it means nirvana, is attainable. So, only nirvana can really liberate you from the cause of this praditi samutpada, dependent origination, the 12-link chain that causes this continuous movement from birth, life, death and rebirth. So this itself is not a very pleasant experience. This is an important point. I think one of the One of the main differences between Vedanta, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, all these traditions on the one hand, and other traditions that belong to the axial age is that in Vedanta and Hinduism, life in this world is considered to be somewhat incomplete or unpleasant or wanting something because it is continuing without an end. Birth, life, death, rebirth, and again life, death, and again rebirth. This wheel continually changing. Chakravat parivartante dukkhanicha sukhanicha. Like a wheel goes on rotating. Good things and bad things. Again good things. Continues. So this is not a very pleasant thing. We have to get out of this wheel. In other traditions, in Confucian or Lavoisian tradition, perhaps they did not articulate any transcendental way out of this. Rather, at empirical level itself, you can find a logical answer. But in monotheistic traditions belonging to the Christianity, in fact, Christianity is not strictly included in this axial age. But actually, Christianity is included because Christianity is to be considered a continuation of the old Hebraic or Jewish tradition, which is included in the axial age, the Hebrew prophets who lived. This is this, and whether you accept Karl Jasper's articulation of axial age or not, that's a different matter. It's not fully accepted by all. But I'm just referring to it, that's all. Now, one way to get out of this is to attain nirvana. Now, how to get nirvana? For that, Buddha articulated the fourth noble truth, that is the path to liberation. For that, he mentioned there are 8 disciplines that you have to practice, 8 fundamental disciplines. And each discipline, Sanskrit, the word samyak is used here, means right, appropriate, or comprehensive. The first discipline is samyak drishti. It means the correct attitude, wisdom, the right views, proper approach to life. So first of all, we must develop a new perspective, a new approach, a new way of looking and interpreting life as such. That is called samyak drishti, the right view, the right approach. So we should give up mithya drishti, the wrong views, and we should uphold and practice samyak drishti, the right views or the right knowledge of Four Noble Truths. Right view means proper understanding that there is a problem, there is dukkha, there is suffering, there is something incomplete about life in this world. This continued movement through the wheel of samsara, that means birth, life, death and rebirth. This is certainly not the most wonderful experience we should aspire for. In a way, you call it boredom if you want, but there is nothing ultimately meaningful about it. So we should get out of this. And for that, the first thing to do is to understand the reality of the Four Noble Truths, Chattvari Arya Satyani. And the second one is Samyak Sankalpa. So for that we must have the right resolve, right decision. We must take a decision as to this is not enough. A mere knowledge is not enough, but rather we must take a resolve. We must decide to bring about a change in our attitude to life. That is called right resolve, a proper determination, a proper understanding of the need to bring about a change in our life. This is the second one. The third one is Samyak Sankalpa. Third one is Samyak speech, Samyak walk, the right speech, how we speak. Now, this again, if you read Buddha's rebirth stories called Jataka Tales, Buddha went through 543. Slight differences with regard to different sources. 543 life cycles. After walking all the way from Lumbini in Nepal that is part of Indian Empire. He came to Bodh Gaya, which is now in India, and sat under the tree and decided to meditate to realize the supreme truth. In course of time, 543 previous life cycles flashed through his mind. In that experience, he confronted himself taking births in so many different previous life cycles. In every life cycle, he himself, Tathagata or Buddha, was some noble being. And of course, he was born as a monkey king. He was born sometimes as a king, sometimes an ordinary person. So there were so many life cycles that he had. In each of these life cycles, he practiced certain values, certain virtues, certain qualities, spiritual qualities, ethical qualities. And slowly he became perfect in all these qualities. So he had his last life, last birth. That is, he became Gautama Buddha. That is the last life. So right speech, samyak walk. So right attitude, proper understanding of the reality of grief or sorrow or dukkha, and then taking the right decision should be accompanied by bringing about a change in the way we interact with others. In the process, speech is very important. So you can find in the Dhammapada and many other books the examples of proper speech, how to make use of our ability to speak. So, for example, lying, slander, unkind words, frivolous talk, insulting somebody, lack of compassion in the usage of language, all these are examples of unrighteous or wrong way of making use of our ability to speak. The right speech means the opposite of all this. No slander, no gossip, all this. So in one of the most foundational, one of the representative texts of Buddhism, it is in Dhammapada, which belongs to Sutta Pidaka, one of the Tripidakas. There you can find in the 26th chapter, 26th Varga, called Brahmana Varga. Means Brahmana there means not Brahmana as we understand in Hinduism, it means a wise man. Tam Bruhi Brahmanam, that is how many of the verses end. Him I call a Brahmana, mean him I call a wise man. And what are the characteristics of a wise person? The right speech, right view, right decision, right attitude, all these are mentioned. And then the fourth one is, of course, the right speech. The fifth one is right conduct. So, samyak karmanta means proper way of doing things, right determination should end in the right action, right conduct. So, if we take a right resolve, then samyak drishti should lead to samyak sankalpa, the right decision, right resolve, and that should lead to samyak walk, proper way of speaking, spiritual way of speaking. And that also should be accompanied by, should lead to the right way of conducting ourselves, doing things. The fifth one is samyak ajiva, livelihood, how we acquire our livelihood, how we make ourselves happy, how we attain our material goals by doing things, what is our livelihood. So, if you give up a wrong way of speaking and accept right way of speaking. So, first of all, we should give up wrong way of speaking, wrong attitudes, wrong decisions. We should take up the right perspective, right way of speaking, right way of doing things. Then that should lead to right way, proper way of earning our livelihood. Samyak ajiva, honestness, sincerity, honesty, sincerity, nobility, integrity, all these are qualities to be practiced by a person who is practicing samyak ajiva. And then the samyak effort, or samyak vyayama, or effort. constant endeavor to maintain moral progress by banishing all evil thoughts and entertaining good thoughts. So all wrong thoughts should be removed from our mind. We should practice thinking positively. Right thoughts, proper thoughts, appropriate thoughts. The seventh one is Samyak Smriti. Samyak Sati. Sati in Pali, Prakrit, it means Smriti in Sanskrit, means proper memory. Means called right mindfulness. So actually, this is closely linked to Satyupattana Sutta, which is the Pali canonical text for mindfulness. Satyupattana Sutta or Mahasatyupattana Sutta. It's a bigger one. Buddha gave a long discourse to the laity, which is called Mahasatyupattana Sutta. And that's a fundamental text. That's actually the origin, the genesis of mindfulness. So, right mindfulness related to mindfulness, etc. There's a lot of profound spiritual psychology in this Satyupattana Sutta. So, proper vigilance. Our mind should be able to understand things, but also to practice detachment. That is, constant remembrance of the anatta or the perishable nature of this world. That's what it is. Everything in this world is impermanent. So, we should remember things, experience things, but also should remember that these things that we experience are essentially impermanent. So once you see something, once you are in contact with something, but also remember that what you are experiencing, what you are contacting with is essentially perishable or impermanent. Then you can practice a kind of detachment. So, and being established in that awareness and detachment by proper realization of the essential impermanence, transient nature of everything in this world. That is Samyak Sati or Samyak Smriti, that is right mindfulness. And then this again leads to another important one that is the last one, Samyak concentration, Samyak Samadhi, proper concentration. So right concentration through these four stages, the last step, then that leads to Nirvana. This is Buddha. Now, something very interesting about here. Buddha was not an atheist. He did not deny God, but he certainly did not affirm any creator God as such. That's for historical reasons. The times in which Buddha lived were in need of some higher, essentially spiritual and ethical way of living or ethical philosophy. A spiritual philosophy which is practical. Though there is a transcendental aspect to it, still there is no connection with a monotheistic Godhead in Buddhism. It is transcendental in the sense it begins with the realization of the fundamental impermanence of everything empirical. So in that case it is transcendental. You cannot realize the impermanence of the empirical world, whatever you see and experience, without realization of something transcendental. So there are, of course, questions that we are going to discuss later in course of time. What was in Buddha's mind when he talked about somebody attaining nirvana? What is the nature of that nirvana? There are many points that we discuss in course of time, and perhaps we can stop here today. This is just an introduction to Buddhism, first class on Buddhism. Because as I mentioned earlier, from 2nd century BC onwards, Buddhism began to develop many philosophical traditions, which in a way, one may argue, had nothing at all to do with Buddha's teachings. If you read Nagarjuna Shunyavada today, Or if you read Lankavatara Sutra, which is an important Mahayana text, you may wonder, but Buddha didn't worry about these things. So that Nagarjuna lived apparently in the 4th century AD, 4th or 3rd century AD, and Buddha passed away in the 5th century BC. So a lot of changes took place. What really happened was, from 2nd century BC onwards, new philosophical ideas began to flourish within the fold of Buddhism. Number of Hindu Sanskrit scholars, in Sanskrit knowing philosophers, they joined Buddhist tradition and they became part of Buddhist intelligentsia. Nagarjuna, many others belong to this category. Before 2nd or 3rd century BC, Buddhist scripture essentially meant the canonical tradition in Pali language, Sutta Pitaka, Vinaya Pitaka and Abhidhamma Pitaka. They actually represented Buddha's original teachings, which were very humanistic and altruistic, nothing profoundly metaphysical. After Buddha's passing away, in the first Buddhist council, many great disciples of Buddha and admirers of Buddha, they recollected the teachings of Buddha. Buddha mostly spoke in Prakrit. He was a man of the masses, not in Sanskrit, though he was himself a Sanskrit scholar trained in the Vedas. But Buddha mostly spoke in Prakrit, which is the local vernacular. There are different varieties of Prakrit. And his teachings were later written down in Pali canon, which came to be known as Tripitakas, the 3 baskets, 3 traditions you may call. That is Sutta Pitaka, Vinaya Pitaka and Abhidhamma Pitaka. But from 2nd century BC onwards, a number of learned Hindu Sanskrit scholars entered Buddhism. And they began to develop different metaphysical systems in Buddhism. That led to the development of the later Buddhist schools, and there were 4 in number, Sautrantika and Vaibhashika, which belonged to realistic schools. And then Vijnanavada and Shunyavada belonged to the idealistic schools. So from 2nd century BC onward, there was a transition from Pali into Sanskrit tradition. Many of these great books written in Sanskrit language were later discovered from places outside India, because there were invasions of Buddhist monasteries by Muslim invaders. Nalanda University was destroyed by Muhammad Bhaktiar Khilji, who came and attacked the great university and massacred the students and professors in Nalanda University. There's a great repository of great Buddhist learning, and many great Chinese philosophers and students like Huyen Sang, different name in Chinese language, came to India and studied in Nalanda and took from there large number of foundational texts of Buddhism and took to China and translated into Chinese language. Again, and with the help of some of those translations, many of the Sanskrit scripts were retrieved by great scholars like Hachime Nakamura and many others, Japanese and Chinese scholars. So different subject, we will discuss that later. Now I'm concluding today's presentation right now. You can have interaction. Please remember, we have only started our discussion, so one should not ask questions that may be more appropriate at a later stage. Thank you. Namaskar.
In the Indian scheme of things, Buddhism is considered a Nastika philosophy because it does not accept the Veda Pramana, the authority of the Vedas. Why does accepting the Veda imply the acceptance of God? You study the Vedanta, Upanishads. What is the concept of God in the Upanishads?
Yeah, so now remember, in Vedantic tradition, Indian tradition, your system of philosophy may be called heterodox or Nastika, because it doesn't accept the authenticity, the testimony of the Vedas. And Buddhism emerged as a kind of revolt against the ritualism that prevailed during his time, especially in the region where he traveled and taught, Bihar. So Bihar was at that time Rajagriha. It is the capital of some of the great empires of ancient India, the Shishunaga dynasty, the Nanda dynasty, all this, So there were Maurya dynasties, three important dynasties, and the capital was close to what is now called Bihar, so Patna in the state of Bihar. So there was a great popularity for ritualistic ceremonies which were perhaps not very spiritual, including animal sacrifices. And Buddha actually revolted against this. So Buddha emphasized the more humanistic, the more compassionate aspects of Hinduism as a revolt against the priestcraft. He did not do anything against the priest, but his movement was actually a rejection of the emphasis on ceremonial rituals, which had become very popular and predominant in Hinduism at that time. The Upanishadic philosophy, or the philosophy of the Gita that we can understand today, was not properly emphasized and practically unknown to common people. Instead of that, the priestcraft mostly focused on ceremonies. And more than everything else, many of these ceremonies involved animal sacrifices, which Buddha considered to be very abhorrent. So which he revolted against. There is a story of Buddha finding on his way, he found that a shepherd was driving a large number of goats to a sacrificial place where a big yajna, Vedic ritual was going on. And then Buddha found a small little lamb was limping, and he took it on his shoulders and he went to the king, and then he said, well, instead of this lamb, you can sacrifice me. That completely transformed the emperor. He became very compassionate, and he banned animal sacrifice in Vedic rituals at this time, in his empire. So that was the impact of the great teacher like Buddha. So his self-sacrifice, but you remember his revolt was a very silent, a spiritual way of revolt. I mean, showing his opposition to something that was very diabolical in his eyes, the animals being sacrificed to please a god. It was something very abhorrent for him. So you have to remember, it is a very interestingly, it was a very spiritual, a silent, spiritual, a very sattvic, we may call it, way of saying no, even to an emperor, don't kill animals. This is an important point. So that's why he emphasized the humanistic aspect of Vedanta, not the ceremonial aspect of Vedanta. And you have to understand very clearly, suppose Shankaracharya, the Advaitin, had lived during Buddha's time. He would have told the king that living animal also is an expression of the divine. If you kill an animal, you are killing an expression of the divine. So it is against spirituality. So Buddha on the other hand said, no, you have no compassion. That's why you are emphasizing these animal sacrifices. So don't do that. So Buddha emphasized the compassion, the kindness, the humanistic values of Vedanta. That's the only difference. Yeah.
My understanding is that Buddha came up with this concept of the middle way, which was between the extremes of self-indulgence and self-denial. And I'm wondering how Vedanta views the concept of the middle way, especially based on a lot of the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna were renunciation.
Yeah.
So does Vedanta agree with the concept of the middle way?
I'm coming to a very I am coming to that now. That's very, very relevant question. Now, in Vedanta and the Gita, this middle way is a very important concept, highly emphasized. That is, yukta ahara, viharasya, yukta cheshtasya karmasu, yukta swapnavabodhasya yogo bhavati dukkha. So, yukta ahara viharasya, somebody who is moderate, who is practicing moderation in eating food, in doing different things. Yukta cheshtasya karmasu, in action, in movement. Yukta means moderate, the middle way. Yukta swapna avabodhasya, sleeping or remaining awake. In all days, you should practice moderation. Yukta means the middle, the appropriate degree. So, now the point is, yogo bhavati dukkha. For people who practice this moderation, yoga is experienced, yoga is possible, yoga becomes accessible because yoga destroys dukkha. Yoga destroys dukkha means something that destroys dukkha. So, moderation is defined as something that destroys dukkha in this Gita verse, yukta ahara vikarasya, etc. So, the very concept of moderation actually comes from Bhagavad Gita. But remember, Buddha taught moderation in the context of spiritual practices, meditation, action, karma, whatever we do, there should be moderation. That was what Buddha emphasized. And there is a historical reason why Buddha emphasized moderation. Buddha himself, according to historians, Buddha practiced extremism in spiritual practices. Extreme kind of self-torturing spiritual disciplines he practiced. And then he became so weak. And then he realized that this is not the right path. And the reason is, there was another great Indian teacher, Vardhamana Mahavira. He was also born as a prince of the kingdom of Vaishali in central India. He was Buddha's elder contemporary. And there are references linking both of them. Some of the followers of Vardhamana Mahavira, who are Jaina religion, Jainism, and Buddhism, they actually interacted. Both of them had respect for each other. Vardhamana was an elder contemporary of Buddha. There are still many followers of Jainism in India. They practice extreme asceticism, fasting, meditation, in fact, non-violence. They practice extreme forms of ascetic disciplines. So Buddha, it is said, he actually practiced this initially. Then he realized this is not the right path. So he brought in this ideal of the middle way, the moderation. That's the context in which it. We will come to that actually in different stage. Here I was, in introduction I was trying to emphasize the context of Buddha's own evolution from a young man living in a palace, realizing the fundamental problems of empirical life in the form, the inevitability of dukkha or incompleteness, and how the realization eventually led him to walk all the way from Bodhigaya and do meditation there, and eventually he realized a way out of this problem, which is called nirvana or liberation. So that aspect was my focus today. So we will discuss this importance of middle path later on. But remember, you are right, Buddha emphasized moderation. The same ideal of moderation is also emphasized in the Yoga Sutras and also in the Bhagavad Gita. That's why I quoted this verse, Yukta ahara viharasya, Yukta cheshtasya karmasu, Yukta Swapna Avabodhasya Yogo Bhavati Dukkha. And Lord Krishna calls it yoga. And this yoga which will destroy all problems, dukkha, which destroys all problems, is possible for a person who practices moderation in eating food, in actions, in sleep, and also in remaining awake. In all these different walks of life, different aspects of life, one should practice the middle path, the moderation. That's what Lord Krishna tells in the Gita. So that's what Sri Ramakrishna also emphasized on different occasions. Okay, thank you.
Maharaj, a question from me. The students who are interested in reading source books of Buddhism, if they want to read original texts, what is the logical point of entry to begin their studies? Dhammapada is usually mentioned.
Yeah, Dhammapada is a very simple book, and you can easily understand it. Very simple teachings, which includes the essence of Buddha's ethical, moral, and spiritual ideas, philosophical ideas. So Dhammapada is a beginning, the original book. Otherwise, Rhys Davids has translated many books into English language. And of course, there are books like S.N. Dasgupta, Surendranath Dasgupta, which is a very history of Indian philosophy, very elaborate. I would suggest that one may, if you want to read an original book, one may begin with Dhammapada. I may take up Dhammapada especially, and to see the comparative, the comparison between the teachings of Dhammapada and also Gita, you can find. Buddha repeats many of the teachings of the Gita in Dhammapada. Yeah.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you.
Can you just review the concept of God in Advaita Vedanta?
Oh, actually, I tell you, Advaita, we discussed this subject very elaborately. I think I gave almost 45 talks on Advaita Vedanta. But so you can go back to any of those lectures and you will get this idea. But I shall repeat in a few words. When we discuss one system of philosophy, it's always fair for the listener's sake to confine to that system of philosophy or something close to that. But anyway, I shall try to explain. Advaita accepts the idea of a monotheistic God. But Advaita tells you that is at one stage of your spiritual progress. When you continue your spiritual evolution, then without rejecting the idea of a personal Godhead, you go beyond it without rejecting. And then you find at a higher level the God whom you consider to be present in a holy place is as a divine spark present in you. It doesn't mean that you are God or anything like that. What it means is that divine spark, which we call God at the monotheistic level, is actually present in all of us. So that's the idea of God in Advaita. And then I have already given a very elaborate description of how the reflection of Brahman in Maya is Ishvara. All I mentioned this earlier. It's okay.
Yes, actual question about Buddhism. The transport of Buddhism from India happened post.
Oh yeah, okay, that's right. That's a very historical thing. How Buddhism disappeared from India. In fact, Buddhism did not disappear from India. Buddhism was absorbed into Hinduism. It's an important thing. Swami Vivekananda, he presented a paper on Hinduism in one of his Chicago lectures, 6 lectures in Chicago, Parliament of Religion. One of the most important documents of the essence of Hinduism is Vivekananda's speech, which is a very long, fairly long speech, it's a paper on Hinduism, which he formally prepared and gave a talk based on what he wrote, paper on Hinduism. And in that document, Swamiji says Buddhism was a natural revolt against many of the injustices that crept into Hindu tradition, Hindu religious tradition. Casteism, too much of priestcraft, that also becoming sometimes going very wild. So there is an internal revolt from within Hinduism against some of its own problems. So Swamiji says Buddhism is kind of, not Buddha, but Buddhism is a rebel child of Hinduism. Rebel child. You have to be very careful when you interpret this in modern context. People, without understanding this context, may think that we are denigrating Buddhism. Not at all. What Vivekananda said was, and one of the greatest admirers of Buddha in modern India was Vivekananda. Something very interesting. One of the greatest admirers of Buddha and Buddhism in modern India was Vivekananda. That Vivekananda says Buddha was a great embodiment of the humanistic, the practical, the egalitarian aspect of Hinduism. In its fullness you find in Buddha. In fact, with regard to Buddha's own rejection of the hierarchy, Swamiji sometimes said, it was certainly unfortunate, but still Buddha was trying to clean up his own home. So that's why Buddha is part of Hinduism, but his role was to act as a rebel. That's what he did. So remember, but again there is an important point, remember. What happened to Buddhism outside India's borders and what happened within India are two different things. After Shankaracharya's coming, Buddhism was absorbed within Hindu tradition. It's an important point. Nalanda was destroyed by Muslim invaders. Muhammad Bhaktiar Khilji destroyed Nalanda University. It's an important point. Bengal was also...
The export of Buddhism from India happened after the emergence of the Sanskrit schools of philosophy, the metaphysical...
In fact, before that, the first time a missionary, Buddhist missionary left India was during the time of the great king Ashoka, Ashoka the Great, 3rd century AD. His own sister or maybe daughter, Sankhamitra, was one of the missionaries who went to Ceylon to spread Buddhism. So there were Buddhist missionaries who went to different places, Central Asia and other places, even at the time of the Emperor Ashoka. And of course, later on, Buddhism, that's why Chinese pilgrims came to India to study in the University of Nalanda. And Huensang came in the 4th century AD. Nalanda University.
You said the Sanskrit philosophers, they were in 2nd century BC.
The Sanskrit philosophers began to emerge and write books from 2nd century BC onwards. That was about 300 years after Buddha's passing away. That was how it didn't happen overnight. Slowly, a distinct philosophical movement began to emerge within Buddhism. Later, these ideas were also were spread to other places outside India. In fact, Mahayana system became very popular in China, later in Japan, that I told you earlier. Many of the great Mahayana texts were discovered in China, and many linguists, Chinese and Buddhist scholars, they retrieved some of the Sanskrit texts which were not fully available in India because they were destroyed when Nalanda University were destroyed by Muhammad Bhaktiar Khilji. Those of you who are interested, if you go to Google, you find Nalanda University. But now they are trying to reconstruct something, not exactly as it was, but on the exact spot they are trying to build up something. Already done it. Nalanda University, very ancient university, thousands of students and professors studied and taught, including many students from Central Asia and China and other places. So, during this time, these great Sanskrit texts were taught in Nalanda University. Manuscripts were taken, books were taken from here. They preserved in mostly in Tibet and China. And great scholars, as I mentioned earlier, they retrieved the broken, many of the earlier books were retrieved with the help of the Chinese translations, because those books have been lost in India. So remember that.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Okay, thank you.
When you were saying that the Buddha was teaching the Four Noble Truths, presumably these are to the people who follow the Vedic tradition at the time. Was the Four Noble Truths, the concept of Four Noble Truths, was that a completely new idea to them, or was it just a better clarification of Vedic tradition?
The Four Noble Truths fundamentally tell you that this life in this world, the birth, life, death and rebirth, this is certainly not the highest, most wonderful situation. There is something inherently incomplete, imperfect in it. In fact, that is the fundamental teaching of Vedanta, Jagat Mithya. The world is mithya, the world is transient, the world is only relative, it is impermanent. That's one of the teachings of Vedanta. But Buddha emphasized this aspect in a very non-speculative way. In Upanishads, Gita and elsewhere, these ideas are depicted in a highly speculative philosophical jargon and vocabulary. Buddha did it in a very non-speculative language. He spoke in the language of the common people. That's an important thing to remember. So, you can read Buddha's discourses, his debates with different people, followers, both monks and laymen, you find. He takes a very informal, very simple language. So Buddha gave it a very simple, very humanistic, focused interpretation, emphasizing the humanistic aspect and also the ethical aspect of this philosophy, the ethical and moral aspect of philosophy. Ethics and morality, based on the fundamental impermanence of everything in this world, in a way constitute the central thesis of Buddhism. Ethics and moral philosophy that you should practice by living in this world, by doing things, by taking a decision, earning a livelihood, by speaking, some make walk, all that you find, some make the right speech, the right attitude, the right livelihood, the right action, the right concentration. So what is this right? There are long interpretations in that. And in that interpretation, this compassion, the humanism are emphasized. And that's what Buddha focused. And that is central to Buddhism in its original form. When you come to Nagarjuna, Vasubandhu, Chandrakirti and others, Dignaga and others, all of them wrote very complicated textbooks in Sanskrit. So, what you are getting today may be a bundle of all this. Remember. So, when you read a book on Shunyavada, the fundamental nothingness, emptiness, you go crazy. What is this emptiness? What it means is that everything in this world is essentially impermanent. That's the idea behind. That is a fundamental thesis of Advaita Vedanta, Jagat Mithyatvam. But when Buddha taught you, Buddha put it in a very simple language. And also, the Buddha brought in this ethical and moral aspect, the practical aspect, that was central to Buddhism.
Maharaj, to clarify, unless Young Chai would prefer to follow up himself, the question he asked was whether or not the concepts were familiar, and I think your answer was that they were familiar concepts, but there were pragmatic aspects added. Is that correct?
Yeah, Buddha gave it a more pragmatic and humanistic in his interpretation.
Thank you, Maharaj.
I shall give an example. Suppose you read a great thesis, a great work on Advaita Vedanta. It is mostly in the form of a metaphysical doctrine, metaphysical philosophical system. But you read Buddha, you often find how you can practice in your everyday life. So, the world is mithya, Advaita tells you, Vedanta tells you. The world is something that's not absolutely real. It is there, but it's not, it will be there all the time. So, the fundamental impermanent nature of this world. Now, Buddha brings this 12-link chain, Praditya Samutpada, based on this. So, once you understand the impermanence of this, then you give up all desire. When you give up all desire, you get liberation from this thirst for, desire for new life, desire for enjoyment. Then you get out of this wheel of samsara, the wheel of transmigratory cycle. And that is called liberation or nirvana. So this idea behind.
So in the live chat, the question asks about the timing of the first Buddhist council. And I know from your prior lectures that the advance of Buddhism came in a later wave.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting timeline.
Yeah.
And the question is, when was the first Buddhist?
Yeah. I think the first Buddhist council, according to, there are different views. According to one school, it happened 55 years after Buddha's passing away in Rajagriha. That's one view. One difficulty in many of these events, I mean, there are various schools among historians as to the exact date when it happened. According to, if you believe that Buddha passed away in 463 BC, then it may be sometime in 400, if you have to count backward, maybe 410, 415 BC, around that time, the first Buddhist council. So, because according to some sources, some of Buddha's original disciples were alive at that time, and they remembered Buddha's teachings, and they were recorded, and that's how that actually led to the formation of Tripitakas. So, there are views that the second council took place in Kandy. Kandy is a city in Sri Lanka. So, but then the first missionary who left India to Sri Lanka to spread Buddhism was late in 3rd century BC. A daughter, according to some historians, the sister of the great king, great emperor Ashoka. But it was much later. So in that case, there are different views on history among historians. There are certain dates which are disputed, debated. That's why even in Buddha's life also, according to some schools, it was from 560 to 480, and according to some other schools, 563 to 483. There are different schools. So I frequently avoid entering into this dispute.
Understood. Is it safe to say that the spread of Buddhism accelerated years after his passing?
Yeah, it became widespread long later. Yeah, that's true. When the first Buddhist council took place, Buddhism was not well widespread even in southern states of India. Mostly it was confined to the northern state, Bihar, some parts of Bengal, UP. UP was the place, the first sermon of Buddha took place in Benares, Varanasi, which is in UP. Not far, it is certainly far, but some hundreds of kilometers away from Bodh Gaya. Buddha must have walked long distance to Varanasi, and he taught his teaching, he gave his teachings to a group of saints who were living in Varanasi. That's how it began.
I'm absolutely fascinated by your unique treatment of Karl Jaspers.
Yeah.
And I can't say that I've heard from another Vedanta Swami, this reference to the
axial age, axial age.
The axial age. This brings together all sorts of transcendental movements in spiritual history and ties them together. To my mind, the rejections of Jaspers are so spurious and ridiculous that they actually prove what he's saying, what he's asserting. And it's really interesting because the connection of these different spiritual movements, in a way, are the subject of this entire course.
You are right. There's one reason. According to Karl Jaspers in his Origin and Goal of History. Now you see, he says this actual age is between 900. No, maybe according to some school 700 to 3rd century BC. Now that excludes Jesus Christ, but actually, in a way, it includes him because he includes some of the Hebrew prophets and the great teaching of Jesus Christ, the transcendental spiritual teaching, is a continuation of the Hebraic tradition, the Jewish tradition, and again that period includes Parmenides, Anaxagoras, Heraclitus, Socrates, and many others. And coming to Eastern Hemisphere, it includes Zoroaster, Confucius, Lao Tse, Buddha, and the Upanishad philosophers. So, the emphasis on something transcendental, the universal, spiritual ethics, something speculative, that's what emphasized during this age, according to him. She was trying to historically analyze the uniqueness of these roughly, you may call it 500, 600 years, which produced great thinkers who emphasize on something transcendental, both in Eastern and also Western hemispheres. That's what he was doing. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Rama Krishna Arpanamastu.